American election and American primaries. When it comes to Biden versus Bernie, what's your take on that, Najib? Who should win the nomination? Is Bernie over after Mini Super Tuesday? Was Michigan basically the state that sealed his fate, given that in 2016 he won the Michigan primary against Hillary? Bullet points.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much over for Bernie. As unfortunate as it is, I think this is a repeat of 2015, Bernie against Hillary Clinton. I think Biden's going to go into the convention as a presumptive nominee. I don't think, I think Bernie's going to hold on because there's the debate on Sunday. I think he wants to hammer home some points and some policy points on Biden and probably use that as leverage in terms of withdrawing his candidacy. I see a tough road for Bernie next week. I can't see him winning Florida, which has the highest number of delegates. Florida, I think, or second highest after California, maybe.
California.
Yeah. So I can't
win California.
Yeah, but I mean, I just don't see a clear path for him.
So you said unfortunate. Let's focus on that word. Why do you think it's unfortunate? Because as you know, or let me just clearly outline my sense, I believe that Bernie would win the popular vote against Trump, but I do not believe that he would win the electoral college vote. This is why I do not want Bernie to succeed, and I only think that only Biden has the chance of being successful with the Midwest path, basically getting the Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, in order to win the electoral college vote, right? So this is why I do not want to see Bernie being the nominee, and there's another reasons as well. There are some red flags when it comes to Bernie's campaign. I do think that the criticism coming from Warren's camp as well has some credibility to it. So why do you say it's unfortunate?
Well, because I think that we need something better than establishment candidates. Actually, I don't think Biden can beat Trump. I think Trump is going to bulldoze him. These kinds of analysis that you see here are all based on, I had these same arguments with people in 2015 when I was saying that Trump was going to trounce Hillary, because people do these kinds of analysis. The fact of the matter is there's no one reason why one candidate beats another. It's very, very complex. And people don't generally vote along state lines, just like they don't vote along provincial lines when it comes to federal politics, especially when you voting for the president. There's so many other factors involved. I would just like to, yeah, but wait. I'll tell you,
so, wait, you were saying,
what I would just like,
no,
I would like a conversation.
Yes.
I think that what Bernie could bring to the table, and I'm not saying, Bernie is better or worse than Biden. What I'm saying is what Bernie would do as a presidential candidate is bring a conversation that much needs to be had and continue that conversation that he's able to do in the primaries now for the second time.
The conversation has been brought up now for like 4 or 5 years. But here is the thing. Bernie is failing to mobilize the millennial base, right? Because in 2016, Bernie was very successful with you guys, young millennials or Generation Z, who showed up, and they showed up in high numbers. The fact that they're not showing up in primaries and the fact that he wasn't able to attract the African-American vote, doesn't that already forecast and foreshadow that he would do really poorly in an election, running against Trump?
No, not at all. So in 2013, I worked in Pakistan for Imran Khan's party. If you don't know who Imran Khan is, he's a famous cricketer. He's now the Prime Minister of Pakistan. His rallies dwarfed Bernie's rallies in terms of young people showing up. Okay, in 2018, he won and is now the Prime Minister. But in 2013, he did terribly. When you looked at his social media presence, his rallies, etc., everybody thought for sure he's going to win, and he didn't because young people didn't show up to vote. The system that we have is designed so that voter suppression is a real thing. And you're going to see it more now with this coronavirus thing. We'll get to that. But the fact of the matter is that the system is designed so that it's not easy for young people to vote and people of color to vote. Now, the African-American vote, I'll tell you what the problem with Afro-American, just with like all ethnicities, the problem is that we are too easily controlled by our leadership. So if you look at analysis of why nations fail, so here's the difference between why people can access communities like ours, which have certain leaders, whether it's our faith-based leaders or our association stuff, who control our vote and can help mobilize us in certain directions. Happens here all the time. As a campaign manager, I can tell you that it happens, which is much harder with larger populations. Okay, so this is a little bit off topic, but I think it's important to understand. So when they talk about Europeans taking over South America and colonizing other places, the difference between that and what they did in the US is the difference between why you can have a border through a city and one side is poverty because it's Mexico and the other side is not because it's the US. When Europeans came to the US, they found that there was no one leader that they could corrupt, which they were used to doing in other countries, right? You find the king, the chief, whatever, you corrupt him, you take all the resources. They came to the US and found that, the people, the indigenous people here are like, we don't own anything. Everything is everybody's, right? So they're like, oh, there's nobody to corrupt because nobody is in charge. So that's how they came up with the idea of taxation. Okay, so let's just give people stuff for free and tax them, let them thrive as entrepreneurs and landowners, etc., and we'll just tax them. So that's how the system came out in the U.S. So it's the same when they're reaching out to faith-based and ethnic communities, faith-based and ethnic communities in campaigning, right? Is that we have these leaders that where these campaigns come in, the DNC and the RNC, they come in and they reach our leaders and they convince our leaders to convince us to vote a certain way. So that's how we vote against our own interests.
Let's talk about Alberta, because there we can agree more. Let's talk a little bit about the budget and the politics of pandemics. What are we looking forward right now? What are the economic consequences of the current hysteria and anxiety when it comes to COVID-19?
Well, I mean, I think, I like the fact that our premier is sort of taking a softer stance when it comes to his stance with the federal government and the opposition parties. I think that's a smart thing to do. I think his continuous insistence on stabilization money from the federal government now makes more sense than it did before. I agree with him. I don't see how this is different for our oil and gas sector as 2008 was different for the auto sector. The issue is going to be that there's going to be no money to give. I mean, if we're setting aside $1 billion for emergency health treatment for COVID-19 and for research on vaccine, I think people are always going to make that a priority. So the money might not be there for him to get from the federal government because there's other priority.
Would they embrace stimulus now? Would they realize?
Well, he's already said that. He's already said that he's
Okay.
embracing stimulus. He's looking at spending more money on infrastructure. Problem is, there's no money to spend.
That's what I'm saying. Where is the money coming from?
Well, that's the problem, right? It's either going to come from the federal government, which I don't think it'll come from there because we have a triple whammy now with the oil and gas and a stagnant economy and COVID-19. So that's going to be the issue, is that, whether or not he could justify getting the money, the stabilization was $2.4 billion or whatever he's asking for. Mm-hmm. The federal government's going to just say there's no money to give.
So what are we going to do? Do you think this is a critical moment and juncture where somebody could introduce a sales tax, or do you think that it will not even be touched or discussed?
I don't think it's going to be discussed. I mean, I think at this point, talking about taxing citizens even more is not going to go over very well. And also, too, I mean, it's still going to play out, but people aren't going to spend. What are you taxing? If you don't have any money, if you're staying at home, if you don't, you're living on EI or whatever issues might come up, if your employers can't pay you, what money are you going to tax? You can't go to events. It's going to be just consumption, but even consumption is going to go down.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also a shortage. Chronic shortages are becoming a problem, and I'm not just discussing the issue of toilet paper. The psychology of buying toilet paper and the psychology of hoarding right now.
I think people might be looking at it the wrong way. When I hear about it and I see it, it actually makes me really sad and concerned. I think that, we have such a consumerism culture.
We got used to such luxuries.
And such luxuries that, we think that everything can be solved by just taking care of our own needs and putting our needs first and hoarding and these kinds of things. I think it's a sad state of our society that's what happens. I think, what I really think that something like this pandemic can really hopefully make us truly woke, right? I think that people need to realize that this isn't sustainable, continual push on capitalism and consumerism, that we need to have different ways dealing with potential tragedies such as this one. I think that hopefully for all you young people that you should really think about learning to grow your own food and build things with your hands. As you know, awesome and amazing as the internet is, that's one of the first things that's going to come down and not be accessible if we don't have electricity infrastructure.
Like, I don't see myself
Sure you can.
gardening.
Of course you can. That's why we have greenhouses. That's why you have greenhouses. I mean, we consume and drive demand for the things that China produces, right? So where's our responsibility in that? Having lived in these countries, like the reality on the ground is much different from what we experience here. We go and we judge other countries by the lens that we see here, that it's so easy, like why don't you do this, and regulations for that, and it isn't that easy, right? And at the end of the day, we have to look at ourselves. And again, this goes back to consumerism. You can't do both. Demand their resources and demand their cheap products and services, and also point your finger when something goes wrong.
All right, then let's just jump on the populist bandwagon. Do you think the populist right is going to exploit this by saying that it was free movement of labor, or tourism, or no borders, or globalization, or interconnectedness that allowed the virus to spread at this rate, and that we have to basically go back to times where border control becomes important when labor is limited, people are limited in their movement? Are we shutting up? Are we increasing restrictions to free movement?
Yeah, I mean, definitely they're going to exploit it because it's in their best interest to do so. I mean, it's always in the best interest of people in power to make sure that that we're all continually blaming each other for everything. I don't think that's a problem. I mean, if you look at countries that are doing a great job of containing this, and Singapore, the number one reason is because after the last one, they did a better job of preparing themselves for the next one, and before that, they did a better job, right? Which we don't do that here in this country because, well, not in our country, sorry, in the U.S. Yeah. Because they're so poorly equipped in terms of healthcare for Medicare for all, and healthcare and sick leave, and all of the things that are important to contain something from spreading like COVID-19 is spreading. So, yes, absolutely, the populist right is going to exploit this. But I think it's the job of all of us to educate ourselves and make sure that we understand that this isn't really a migration problem.
Do you think that in times of misinformation and fake news, educating people with increased anxiety is something that is doable? Yeah, right, because it's now we are facing higher levels of anxiety, and also racism and COVID-19, right? There is a significant rise in racism against the Asian community with COVID-19 that is driven by ignorance and misinformation, et cetera, et cetera. How are we going to, fight that?
You know what? Nothing drives racism. Racism drives everything. You know what I mean? Like you're looking for an excuse. If you're going to look for an excuse to hate somebody else based on the color of their skin or their faith or how they look, you're going to find any reason to do that. There's a funny meme that went around is like, all the people who stopped going to Chinatown to eat should also stop eating Italian food, right? But you don't see anybody giving up pizza and pasta, right? So, if you truly want to understand racism and bigotry, it never has anything to do with these kinds of things. It's if it was actually that complex and people had really gave it that much thought, they wouldn't be bigots to begin with. If you think about the worst case scenario, how many of us are prepared for that? Can you take care of yourself? Can you take care of your family? Like, I couldn't sleep all night last night thinking about how I'm going to take care of my daughter, right? So I'm not saying that that's what we should think about, but we should always be concerned about what kind of society we've created where we're that close to that scenario, where we don't have anything in play to protect us, right? I don't know if you guys have noticed what the rich are doing, but they have their islands and they have their private planes.
They're isolating.
And they're isolating. They can isolate faster than any of us because they're ready, right? The best thing to happen, not best because I don't wish that on anyone, but, prominent people do get COVID, that's much more likely that we'll see a vaccine really quickly. You guys don't think it's kind of funny that, a month ago we didn't have money for anything, but now 8 billion shows up, 1 billion shows up, 1.5 trillion out of nowhere, like seat cushions, you know, like, oh, we found 1.5 trillion to bail out the stock market, you know, here's 8 billion. Because you know why? Because this disease affects rich white people, right? And if it didn't, rich old white people. Okay?
Which is basically,
and if it didn't, trust me, right? What we'd be hearing about it, if it only affected poor people in other countries or brown people in other countries, we'd be hearing a lot about maybe 40 million we could send, you know, maybe 10 million, we scrape together, we can send thoughts and prayers, right? Have you guys heard one thoughts and prayers thing? No, right? You're really looking at some serious solutions. 500 million for research right away, right? So don't you guys find that interesting? Like, you know, a month ago, nobody had any money for anything. $1.5 trillion to bail out the stock market. Are you fucking kidding me? At the end of this day, what you have to understand about parties only care about two things. They want the candidate that is not going to restrict their right to control their own finances and policy. That's why they will never accept a Bernie. And the reason why I agree with you that Bernie is not the right candidate and will not win the Electoral College is because of that, because Bernie cannot win the support of the DNC. He cannot win the support of people who support the DNC, true Democrats,
even if he would
because
win
he's been an independent his whole life.
If
you want to bring something down,
voter,
and here's another thing, because of the audience that I'm talking to, I'm telling you something right now. If you really want to look at history, the reason why the hippie movement of the 60s and 70s failed is because they always talked about burning things down, right? You can't have that. And that's what the problem with Bernie is as well, right? If you want people to change, you have to build something better. Learn from disruption, you guys, right? Uber didn't say they're going to burn down the taxi industry. They built something better. Okay, Airbnb didn't say they're going to burn down the hotel industry. They built something better. If you guys really want to see a change, the party system isn't going anywhere. Okay, just build something better that young people will actually go out and vote. Young people and people of color will actually go out and vote. Right? This continuous belief that, you know, in order to change things we have to burn down the thing before has never ever worked. The only thing that will work is build something better. And this is why Bernie fails. And this is why Bernie fails over and over again, because his whole history is just burning things down, and that's not going to work.
All right, we can agree at least on that. Questions, Ruan?
So, do you guys think that it'll make any difference who the vice presidential picks are for Biden and Trump? I guess he'll be running against.
Well, unless it's Sarah Palin, but I don't think that that will you know, make you or break you. I do believe that Biden should choose smartly, and he should pick a woman. Now, who that woman will be, that's a big question mark, but I don't think that it will be, or maybe he will pick Mayor Pete, who knows? I don't know. Like, I was kind of surprised about his endorsement. So, I don't know, what do you think, Najib?
I'm still wondering, like, you know, what Americans are less ready for is a gay president or a woman president.
A woman president.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Right, gays before women.
Yeah, you're probably right.
It's
as long as it's a gay white male. Yeah,
exactly, gay white male always trumps a woman.
That's another. There's a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy.
Tell us about the hierarchy.
So
we like the hierarchy.
I think it's important. The problem is that presidential candidates always pick the most vanilla VP, right? And they do that on purpose, right? Is because they don't want the VP to outshine them. He's not going to pick Buttigieg. Okay, Buttigieg will outshine him. I see it very unlikely that he'll pick Warren again because she will outshine him.
Warren will not outshine Biden, but I don't think he will pick.
I think he will. But that's exactly right. So, you know, that's a safer bet, right? That's a safer pick. And that's what, you know, generally, and that's the issue. And that's why we never see very strong VP picks, right? Is because the idea is that you pick someone who's not going to overshadow you as the president.
Al Gore was pretty much outshining sometimes Clinton. There were elements when Al Gore was, there were-ish.
Yeah.